All right, welcome back to Doctrines 3, the Doctrines of Angels, Church, and End Times, as we continue our discussion of Eschatology, the doctrine of last things, or doctrine of the end times. I want to consider this week and next week this concept of the tribulation. This week we'll talk about it in more general terms, about how long the tribulation will be, what will the tribulation basically be like, that kind of thing. And then next week we'll cover more detail about about the tribulation itself, but the Antichrist and the two witnesses and the 144,000 and those kinds of things. But I want to talk this week just in general about the tribulation. And let's start out with whether or not there will even be a tribulation. What is the tribulation? Where does this idea come from in Scripture? We start out right here with Matthew chapter 24, verse 21, in what's called Jesus' Olivet Discourse. This is a teaching that Jesus had, Matthew chapter 24 and 25, that Jesus spoke to his disciples about the end times. And it's also in Mark chapter 13 and also in Luke chapter 21. And in these few chapters, Jesus outlines for us the future events. And when we talk about these things, Jesus here in this passage, for then there will be a great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. So basically, Jesus is saying there will be a great tribulation. That's the words he says right there. So what is the nature of this tribulation? Is this an actual short period of time? And how long will that time be? Is this something that's still yet future to us? Is this something that was future to Jesus and yet not future to us? Or is this just something Jesus is saying in general? There are four different ways to interpret these prophetic passages, either of Jesus or the visions of Daniel or the entire book of Revelation itself. And those four ways, the first is what we call idealist. The idealists basically state that these are symbolic, and they are just simply the ideal of how we are as Christians, and they just simply are symbolic of the nature of evil and the fact that we're going to go through tribulation as Christians, that they're really not meant to be taken literally, but more symbolically. Again, we kind of take this and throw this one out because I don't know how else you can interpret this verse. For then there will be a great tribulation such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. Sounds like he's talking about a short period of time, sometime in the future. So that begs the question, has this time period already taken place, or is this time period yet future to us? That brings us to what's called the historicist. Basically, that the writers of the Gospels, the writers of the books, were writing from a historic perspective. In other words, they were written after the fact, and that Jesus is talking about something perhaps future to Jesus, but not future to the writers. So if Matthew wrote considerably later, and he may have been writing about in the historicist view, that he's writing about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The question is that's what Jesus is talking about, and then Matthew wrote about it after the fact as history from a prophetic, even though attributing prophecy to Jesus. Here we have a problem because I don't believe that when God inspired these words, every other indication says that Matthew was written first, that he wrote probably sometime 45 to 50 AD, at least 20 to 25 years before the destruction of Jerusalem. And here's the biggest problem with this is that it doesn't match. If Matthew was writing after the fact, then this great tribulation that Jesus is talking about, surely there have been greater tribulations than the destruction of Jerusalem, and certainly there already had been before then. That was actually the second time Jerusalem had been sacked. Jerusalem would be sacked at least 3 other times in Earth's history, going through all of the Crusades and such. So surely this statement here that this tribulation, if we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, cannot be something that is so great that it had never been seen before, nor will ever be again. that brings us to then the preterist viewpoint. Preterist means much like the historicist. However, what they say is that that Matthew did write beforehand, and that was prophetic, so that it's future to the writer, yet has already passed, and is already now in our time has passed to us. Again, having the same problems as the historicist, in that this the question is has Jerusalem been sacked before? Has the tribulation of AD 70, if that period of tribulation has already gone by, then could it be said that the tribulation of the destruction of Jerusalem under Titus in AD 70, is that something that had never been done before? Well, obviously Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed Jerusalem. You read through Jeremiah, you read through Lamentations, and there was some pretty nasty stuff going on at that time as well. So that tribulation had already happened before. And Jesus saying, no, it will never be again. And again, obviously things such as the Holocaust and other tribulations would far outstretch or far surpass the tribulation of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So that leaves us with one final way of seeing this, is that this is yet future to us. We call this a futurist perspective, that Jesus not only was speaking prophetically in his time, but these words have not yet been fulfilled. So we're still yet looking forward to a great tribulation such as never been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be again. This certainly sounds like dire words from our Savior. So just looking at this verse in and of itself, as we then expand this idea and start to look at other passages that deal with the tribulation, recognizing that this is still yet a future time period, brings some other big important questions to the forefront. So the question then is, how long will this period be? And perhaps you've heard that this is a 7-year tribulation. Well, where do we get that idea that it is a 7-year tribulation? It comes to us from Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. This is called the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks, that Daniel prophesied that there would be a period of time of 70 weeks, that it would be divided into a period of 69 weeks, and then a final period of 1 week. And you say, well, a week is only 7 days. Where are we getting this idea of 7 years from? He also tells us, or the book of Revelation also tells us, that this period, that half of it is 42 months, or 1,260 days, which is where we understand the idea of years. Daniel is using the word week, which is the Hebrew Sabbath, meaning 7 years, because they also had a Sabbath year, that in the Jewish calendar they would work for 6 years and then take a 1 year off to let the ground lay fallow, which is actually in the book of Daniel, as he's in the context there in Daniel chapter 9, he's telling the Israelites that the reason why they were in captivity for 70 years was because they had not let the land grow fallow for 70 periods of time. So 70 times 7, go back 490 years, takes you all the way back to the time of David when the kingdom was set up. That all the time that Israel was a kingdom, they had not ever followed the rule that they were to let the land grow fallow and take a year off. So then they were being punished for that, and God was going to give his land the Sabbath's rests. So that tells us then this idea that there would then be another period of 420 years, another period of 69 weeks, 69 periods of 7 years. And that there was going to be another period of time that what was 1 week long, which is one period of 7 years. Revelation backs this up, that there would be 1,260 days for half of it, and as this time is divided into two parts, 42 months equaling 7 years, equaling 3.5 years rather, and 1,260 days. You say, well, wait a minute, isn't that a little bit more than, or a little bit less than, if you have a 365-day year? Well, what we do with that is, this is based on a 30-day month. You see, in prophecy, they went by, and Jewish calendars went by a lunar cycles. So the moon is about 29 and a half to 30 days long, a little bit more than 229 and a half, just short of 30 days is a lunar cycle, and that's how they calculated their months. And so when they say 42 months, they mean a period of 42 periods of 30 days, 42 lunar cycles, not a solar year, which is what we use, and vary our month length to 31 days and even one month of 28 days in order to get 365 days into the year. So the difference here is between a lunar calendar and a solar calendar. Sometimes people say that, well, that's kind of an invention of students of prophecy, but it's necessary in order to see these periods. But it also happens several times in non-prophetic passages as well. In the book of Genesis, book of Numbers, book of Deuteronomy, all times they're saying that a full month, a lunar cycle, was the period of mourning, which was 30 days. And we see that all throughout the Old Testament, this idea of there being a lunar cycle of 30 days, equaling a month. All right. The 7-year period is divided into 2 equal parts of 3.5 years. We said, again, we get that from Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. This begins with the Antichrist, which we'll talk about next week in much greater detail. The Antichrist himself making a peace treaty with the nation of Israel for a period of 7 years, at which time, during this, at the midpoint, at the 3.5-year mark, he will break that treaty, which then begins the period of great tribulation, or the time of Jacob's trouble, which is the second half, the latter half of the tribulation. If you remember last week, we talked about the rapture, that there were some who say that the rapture takes place at that midpoint of the tribulation, 3.5 years in. Both parts are characterized by intense persecution and judgment. However, the first part is said to be considerably less than the second part. All right, that's our video on the length of the tribulation and the fact of the tribulation. We'll just do one more video this week talking about the describing or the uniqueness of the tribulation.